Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Closing out the first week of December with a jam-packed podcast that'll make any sports fan curious to know more about what's going on throughout the landscape, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with yours, JAYREELZ. For my first-timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And yes, your boy, your favorite little podcast host, has been free, emancipated. Because if you recall, on Monday's podcast, which I released late in the night, and I'm sure you probably didn't get it till the following morning, the last week and a half for yours truly has been a bit, I'll just say, dicey and maybe even challenging, more so from a psychological and even spiritual standpoint. Because over the last week and a half, not only did I have to report for jury duty, but I was summoned on a case that, thankfully, for yours truly, ended Tuesday morning with a settlement between the plaintiff and the defendant. So without getting into it, because I'm sure that's not what you want to hear right at this very moment, but I bring it up because with no podcast last Monday due to jury duty, and even though I should have recorded that night, but I was kind of going about it and just taking a moment to kind of see where this was all going to lie and how it was going to unfold. And with it being Thanksgiving week, and of course I didn't have a podcast last Thursday, where going into this week with so much that was going on, listen, I had to record there on Monday evening, where I understand I could have recorded Sunday night, but I didn't. But anyway, with that being said, my schedule was screwed up a little bit based on the jury duty and having to report to that. And to think, I would have been in jury duty right now, not recording as I speak, because this case could have gone not only this whole week, but even into next week. But thankfully they settled. That is in my rearview mirror. And the one thing I learned in this process was to stay in the moment, be present, as I like to say, but even more so because I didn't make mountains out of molehills. I didn't look at it as a situation where the sky was falling. And granted that I'm a creature of habit, and granted that if I did have to go through the 2 weeks, if they didn't settle until next Friday, I would have been, who knows, maybe even despondent at that point, because that's time that's taken away from me to not only produce content, but also to try to work with possible partners and sponsors when it comes to trying to generate revenue and income, on top of trying to reach out to potential guests for the podcast and even live stream for that matter. Every live stream coming at you Wednesday, 12 noon, high noon Eastern time. And of course, I do my podcast pre-games 9:30 a.m. on YouTube. So just in case if you don't know, now you know. So with that being now in the past, and I could actually exhale a few times and just be grateful and thankful that it was resolved a lot sooner than I had anticipated. And therefore, now that I'm back in the saddle, back where I belong on a Thursday in the morning to record and put forth a very informative, entertaining, but more importantly, a Thursday podcast to close out the week. So let's get right to it as we have some big games in the NFL this weekend. And that's what the theme is going to be, because which teams are going to stay alive in this process. And I understand that anything can happen here over these last 5 weeks. You have the last weekend of byes forthcoming, where you have San Francisco, Carolina, the Giants, and New England all have the week off. And after that, it is going to be 16 games, whether spread out over 3 days, 4 days, or maybe even 5 days for that matter. Or maybe not, because Christmas does fall on a Thursday. But with week 14, it kicks off tonight, and you have a very good one there. Amazon Prime in the Motor City between the Cowboys and Lions. And remember, these two teams obviously played last week because they play every Thanksgiving, as you know. But there are two teams going in opposite directions. The Cowboys flying high. Remember, they were 3-5-1 after that disastrous loss to the Arizona Cardinals. And then just a couple days later, had the terrible tragedy with Marshawn Nealon, the defensive player. And ever since the passing of their fallen teammate, the Cowboys have used that a little bit as a rallying cry as they've come from, I don't want to say the dead. It's a terrible pun when you think about it, considering talking about Nealon. So I'm not trying to be distasteful, as you all know, by any stretch, but if that was, JAYREELZ, come on, you shouldn't have said that in the same sentence, my apologies. But the Cowboys have played well since that game. And not only that, but they've had the two big games, especially the one at home against the Eagles when they were down 21-0, and they came all the way back to win 24-21. And then what we saw there on Thanksgiving, which we highlighted there on Monday's podcast. But the Cowboys now 6-5-1, and a lot of people think that they could be a dangerous team, that they could be on the rise to maybe not only make it into the playoffs, maybe even win a division, considering what the Eagles have done here over the last couple of weeks. But how I look at it is that the Cowboys still have a lot of work to do. Because with that tie that they got early in the year against the Packers, if they were 7-5 right now, I would look at them as more dangerous than 6-5-1. Because at the end of the day, whether it is for a wild card or for the division, it's a situation where they're going to have the same amount of wins as that team in order for them to advance into the postseason. Let me explain. For the wild card, the Niners, who have a bye, as you know, they are 3 wins behind them. And let's say, for argument's sake, if they do end up, let's say, 11-5-1, which is what the Cowboys have to do the remainder of this year in order for them to get to 11, that means that the Niners, when they come back from their bye, they're going to have to go 2-2. Is that possible? It is. And off the top of my head, their schedule, they still have Seattle, Arizona, the Bears going there, to San Francisco, and there's another game that I'm missing there. But you would think that they're going to win at least 2 games, so where the Cowboys are going to have to win their remaining 5. And as far as the division goes, which is probably the better shot for them to get into the postseason, they would have to get to, let's say, 11 also, because you figure that with 5 games left, the Eagles will probably go 3-2. And they do have Washington twice, so you got to keep that in mind, as well as a trip to LA to play the Chargers on Monday night. Not going to be an easy game. And just trying to think who else I have on the schedule here off the top of my head. But let's just say, for argument's sake, out of those 5 games, even if they win 2 of those, let's say they go 2-3, Cowboys got to go 4-1. Is it possible? It is, but that's still asking a lot. And think about this. If they were to run the table and win the next 5 games, for argument's sake, that would go on top of the 3 games in a row that they've won. So you mean to tell me that the Cowboys are going to end this regular season with 8 straight wins and possibly going into the playoffs? I think that's highly unlikely. So as many people think, the Cowboys, right now they're dangerous, and they are, but full steam ahead, I think they're going to make it to the playoffs. I'd pump the brakes on that. But to me, the more bigger and intriguing story are the Lions tonight, because if they lose this game, 7-6, and they're already on the outside looking in, not only on the division, as you know, but also for the wild card. And if they win tonight, at least they'll be a game behind the Niners in the standings as far as the 7 seed goes in the NFC. So they lose tonight, and their schedule is not easy, to say the least. They go to LA to play the Rams next week, followed by the Steelers coming into Ford Field, and then the last 2 games on the road at Minnesota and at the Bears. So there is not an easy game. And people say, the Vikings not too bad, and the Steelers, who knows where they're going to be, considering that they're also starting to fade here a little bit. But the Steelers, they're going to be desperate to try to at least hang on to the AFC North race, considering that they're in a flat-footed tie with the Ravens right now. And then with the Vikings, divisional road games, as I've said a million times over, they are not a shoo-in. So even if the Vikings lose 30-0 the next couple of weeks before the Lions invade US Bank Stadium, that doesn't mean that, the Vikings are just going to lay down for the Lions to go in there and beat them up, so then they'll set themselves up for a date at Soldier Field to see whether or not they're going to get into the postseason. And without their starting wide receiver there, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're also missing key players on that offensive line. We know about Frank Ragnow, who came out of retirement but failed his physical, so he went back into retirement. And they have a defense that's nicked up. It does not look well for the Lions here throughout the remainder of this year. Now, I do think tonight they'll play well, and I won't be surprised if they win. Because I'm sure they're thinking, and Dan Campbell, the head coach, is probably saying, hey, if we don't win tonight, we're going to be in trouble. They cannot go to LA 7-6 and to think they could actually come back from that trip at 500. And if that's going to be the case, you could say bye-bye to their season. And it's a shame because the Lions, 2 years ago, making it to an NFC Championship game, and we know how that unfolded. And then last year, as a 1 seed in the NFC with a bye, had the Commanders go in there and beat the brakes off of them. So could they not make the postseason this year? Chances are that's going to be the case, and tonight's going to go a long way as to whether or not, at least for 1 week, will stay alive in the playoff race, or if not, they could be on their way out as soon as tonight. So we'll have to watch out there. Then the games on Sunday. Indianapolis at Jacksonville. The Colts fading quickly. Started off 7-1 and now lost 3 of their last 4. Jacksonville, they are now in first place in the AFC South based on tiebreakers. So for Indy to try to wrestle that back, they need to win that game in the worst way. And I don't know if they're going to do so. Daniel Jones is now also hurt. I believe he'll play in the game, but which Daniel Jones are you going to see? The guy that we saw in the first 8 weeks of the season or the guy that we've seen here in the last 4? So in Jacksonville, they're an on-again, off-again type team. They're in their building. They don't have much of a home field advantage, but Indy has not played well there over the years. If you recall that game a few years ago when Indy was trying to fight for a division and they spit the bit there in that final game, that was, I believe, Matt Ryan was the quarterback. Well, let me see if I get that right. Maybe it was Phillip Rivers. But still, it's a situation where Indy, I don't know if they're going to be able to come out of this alive. So that is a must-win for them down in Jacksonville. Division game, they actually need it in the worst way. And I understand it's not a 5-star sexy matchup, but that's a game that a lot of people pay attention to. 2 squads, 8-4, fighting it out there in the AFC South. Then in the AFC North, I get it. This isn't your uncle or even your daddy's Steeler-Raven game. This is going to be a far cry from Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, Haloti Ngata, and Terrell Suggs in that group, where the Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger, Hines Ward, James Harrison, Troy Polamalu, it is going to be anything but that. Now, you may have some moments where you may see some hostility and physicality, but these two teams, please, I yearn for those days. It's still a highly contested rivalry because you have the 2 head coaches that have been there since this rivalry was at its peak in John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin. And, of course, all the buzz around Tomlin this week, whether or not this could be his last go-around. Could it be a situation where there is a mutual parting of the ways? That could happen. And I talked about this on the channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Where Mike Tomlin, I don't think that the Steelers, maybe if they fall apart here down the stretch to where come week 17, week 18, they're not even involved in this AFC North race. Maybe there'll be a scenario where there'll be a parting of the ways. Because remember, Tomlin still has 2 more years left on his deal through next year in 2027. I don't think the front office is going to cut bait knowing that they're going to have to pay Tomlin 2 more years and then hire another guy to pay that coach. And I understand that Tomlin, he's probably making, I don't know, if I had to guess, somewhere between $5 and $8 million a year. So you mean to tell me they're going to let him go and then pay another guy anywhere between $3 to $5 million, depending on who that is, where they'll probably go defensive coordinator route? Considering in the 56 years that I've been alive, between Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin, they've all been defensive guys. So why would that change their philosophy as far as hiring a head coach that is going to be an offensive-minded guy? They're probably going to try to pluck some young guy. Listen, Cowher, I believe, was 34 when he got the job, and Tomlin was around that same age too. Why would it be any different this go-around? And people could throw all those names out there that they did on Sunday to me, whether it was Brian Flores, which I don't know if they go that route again, but quite possible, or Jesse Minter, because of the connection that his dad has with Tomlin. I don't know if they want to go that route. Maybe familiarity will help, but probably not. Mike McCarthy's too old for the Steelers' liking, I would think, despite him being a local guy. But anyway, I don't want to make this all about Tomlin and the coaching hire because that's not the case as of right this very second. But that is a huge game for both teams. I think it's even bigger for Pittsburgh than it is for Baltimore, and I'll say it for this reason only. With that performance that you saw there on Sunday, I can't see them having another putrid effort. I could actually see them bouncing back, similar to what we saw them respond after their loss, what was that, in Week 8, when they came back and people thought, oh, there's no way Indianapolis, they're going to go into Pittsburgh and just blow their doors off. And Pittsburgh obviously beat the Colts. Now, I understand they got 6 turnovers in the process. If you could guarantee me at least 3 or 4 turnovers against the Ravens, maybe they'll win the game on Sunday. But it's more important for them. People could say, well, maybe it's more important for Baltimore because they do have that final game in Pittsburgh at the end of the year, and that could be for the division. But to me, with how they played there on Sunday, if they lose that game, they're not going to win the division. That's all there is to it. And even though they have the Dolphins coming in the following week, and then after that, they go to Detroit, and they do go to Cleveland before ending their season against the Ravens. But I think if they lose this game, forget it. They're done. The Steelers will be toast. And even if the Dolphins, and I get it that the Ravens, even if they do win, they'll be a game behind with that game at the end of the year. But who knows? They may not even make it till then. So, but that's still going to be an important game. We'll keep our eyes peeled for that. Then, of course, the Sunday night game, which is an excellent game, Houston at Kansas City. Houston, who has not fared well at Arrowhead over the years, whether regular season or playoffs. And Kansas City, to me, they lose this game, they're done. Now, Houston, they can lose this game, be 7-6, and they'll have an outside shot for the division because of what they've done in the division as of right this very moment. And let me just pull up the standings here real quick. Because I believe the Texans, what is their divisional record? They're 4-1. And with Indianapolis and Jacksonville barring a tie, and they play, as you know, this weekend, one of those 2 teams are going to get a loss. So I know they don't want to fall 2 games back. If they do lose Sunday night in Kansas City, and if Jacksonville or Indianapolis wins, they'll have a 2-game edge on the Texans. But you have to remember, the Texans have already beaten the Jaguars, and they still have games against the Colts, final game of the year, and they have beaten the Jaguars twice, have they not? No, they lost to the Jaguars. That was their only loss in the division so far this year. And then they beat the Titans, Jaguars, and Colts. So they still have the... Is I'm reading this correctly? Yeah, they're 4-1. So they only have the 1 game against the Colts left. That's why I got all screwed up. But even if they do fall 2 games back, maybe in this case they're probably going to root for, I would think, the Colts, considering that they already have a leg up on them as far as the division goes. So even if they're 2 back behind the Colts here, let's say after Sunday night, they know that if they could try to run the table, they'll end up winning a division or come close to that. We've got to see what Jacksonville's going to do too down the stretch. But for Sunday, that's an enormous game. And like I said, Kansas City lose that game, forget about it. They're done. They're not going to make the playoffs because they don't have tiebreakers. The only tiebreaker they have is against Indianapolis. And if they lose to Houston, they'll have no tiebreakers against them, against the Chargers, against the Jaguars, against the Bills. So you can forget about it. That's where we stand with Kansas City. But then you have other big games. Chicago at Green Bay, that is your big game of the day. Let's see where the Bears stack against the Packers. Now again, with the tie that the Packers got against Dallas earlier this year, tiebreakers are not going to matter at the end of the year. So even if it's a situation where the Packers sweep the Bears or vice versa, whomever has more wins, and in this case, the Bears could end up tied in the win column with the Bears, or I should say the Packers could end up tied with the Bears in the win column, and they'll win the division because they'll be, let's say they win 12, they're 12-4-1, the Bears are 12-5. Well, because they had the 1 less loss, they win the division. And that's where the Bears are going to have to win 1 more game than the Packers in order for them to win the division. So I'm sure they want to win this game, considering what you saw there in Philadelphia on Black Friday, how they just ran all over the Eagles. They're going to need another effort like that because I'm sure they don't want to put the ball in the hands of Caleb Williams 35, 40 times a game, although he did throw, 35 passes in the game against the Eagles, despite them rushing for over 200 yards on the ground. But I think another very interesting test to see this Bear team and what they've done to this point. Mind you, now they got the good win under their belt against Philadelphia, but now it's a divisional game against their fierce rivals in Lambeau. And if the Bears come out alive in that one, that could go a long way. Not only as far as the Bears and their fate in the NFC, being currently the 1 seed in the conference, but maybe a team that you really have to take seriously as one that could maybe even get to a Super Bowl? Who would have thought in Week 14 I would have said that about the Bears? But that could possibly happen. And then you have Eagles and Chargers Monday night. But we could talk about that on Monday, especially as the weekend unfolds and how it stands there when we get to the podcast then. And to a lesser degree, Cincinnati at Buffalo. Cincinnati, because they're 2 games behind the Ravens and Steelers, one of those 2 teams are going to lose. So they're going to gain a game on either Baltimore or Pittsburgh. And if they go into Buffalo and beat them, and I'm not sold, I said this on Monday, I'm not sold on the Bills and their performance in Pittsburgh where, oh, the Bills are back, watch out, look out. That was more of an indictment on how awful the Steelers were than how good the Bills were. So that you have to keep in mind going into this game. And the Bengal defense actually played pretty well there on Thursday night against the Ravens, where they coughed up, or I should say the Ravens coughed up 4 times when it comes to turnovers with fumbles and interceptions. So if they are opportunistic in that regard, they actually have a shot in the game. And of course, Joe Burrow being healthy is going to help. So that's a game that we will certainly look at. Excuse me, not as one of the highlight games or a game like that, but if they lose, forget about it, they're going to be done. But if they win, they're going to be hanging around and certainly a little bit closer there in the AFC North, which is their only shot to make the playoffs this year. So that's what you got with the NFL. Which of those teams are going to stay alive after Week 14? Will the Lions stay alive? Will the Colts? Because they'll be 8-5, and you don't think they're going to be able to come out of it alive if they lose this game Sunday in Jacksonville. Pittsburgh, if they lose, I think they're going to be done. Will they stay alive? Houston, although they'll be in the mix still, but that could be a bit of a blow. Kansas City, that will be a death knell if they lose. And if Cincinnati loses, they're going to be done as well. So who stays alive after Week 14? That remains to be seen. Yeah, I won't go to the other games on the schedule. Seattle, Atlanta, Dolphins at the Jets. That I'll just pass and skip on as we move it along here. Let's get to the college football because you don't have a lot of intriguing themes this weekend. I'm sorry. I get it if you're in Bloomington and if you are on the team, staff, the university, etc. I'm sure they are hoping to bring home a Big Ten championship. And to me, that is the only storyline of that game. Ohio State has nothing to prove. I think they're going to win the game on Saturday night. So would I be shocked if Indiana wins? I can't say I'd be shocked because I got to give Indiana their props. Now, the only game that they've beaten of note, or that they've beaten of note, is Oregon. And, all right, I'll give it up. But if they beat Ohio State here, is it going to be a thing where Ohio State maybe doesn't have their foot on the gas because they know that they have bigger reasons and bigger goals to set other than a Big Ten championship? It's possible. And remember last year, Ohio State did not play in the Big Ten championship. It was Oregon and Penn State because of their loss to Michigan, if you recall, in Columbus last year. But I don't know. Does Ryan Day take this game so seriously where, let's show Indiana who's the boss of the conference? Or is it a thing where, we want to show up and we are going to show up and play, but if we lose, we just want to defend our title. To me, that is the story there with Ohio State. As far as Indiana, I'm sure they're going to want to win a Big Ten championship. We'll see what happens. But I'll say this. Even if Indiana wins, let's say even if they win 34-27, and they led from in front, whatever, I think that's going to add more pressure to them going into the playoff than if they were to lose. And even if they lose the game, they're still going to get a bye. Because, as you know, Ohio State and Indiana are 1 and 2. So if they lose, they're probably going to go as far down as 4. They're going to have a bye. They're going to have a week off. And then whomever's going to, I guess the 5 seed will go in there if the 5 seed wins. And obviously if the 12 seed wins, they will go to the 1 seed. But if it is chalk, they're going to have a home game. So, and I don't think there'll be pressure if they do lose to Ohio State. Now, if they win, they're going to be number 1 because they're going to overtake Ohio State for that regard. And Ohio State may go down as far as 3, maybe 4 at the most. But I think there'll be more pressure on Indiana to win the whole thing. And that's just me. So, not to say that they should lose the game because there won't be pressure. Listen, if they go all out and win 34-27, it was somewhat convincing, then everybody's going to look at Indiana as the favorite to come out of this thing, which will be deserved, but that's going to be a lot to ask for a team that has never, ever been in this position in the school's history, or at least going back to 1967, which I believe was the last time they won a Big Ten championship. So you got to keep that in mind. And then you have Alabama, Georgia, where if Alabama loses, that's going to be interesting with the committee. Now, we would still think Alabama would get in because right now, Alabama, in the standings or in the rankings, they are 9th. Now, if they win, they will get a bye. Georgia would probably go down maybe 5 or 6. But do you catapult Alabama not only as the SEC champion, but they would have beaten Georgia twice this year? And could they leapfrog 5 other teams to get to 4 or maybe even 3 for that matter? Now, it's possible because Texas Tech, who plays BYU, and if Texas Tech wins, they'll probably go up to 3. Considering Ohio State, Indiana, there's going to be a shift there if one of those 2 teams loses. And if Alabama wins, they could go up as high as 4, where Texas Tech will move up. But the thing is, if Alabama loses, and remember, they're 9th, and they will have suffered their 3rd loss, what does that mean for the committee? Which will now lead to the next question. What does the committee do when it comes to Notre Dame, Miami, Alabama? A lot of that is going to be contingent on, of course, Georgia winning, as we know. Because if Alabama wins, they're in. No ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it. But if they lose, and now let's say if BYU beats Texas Tech, and I think Tech is favored by, not that I care or matters what the point spread is, but I believe it's at least 7. And you also have to recall, earlier this year, when BYU played Texas Tech, and we know the events of what happened there. I just want to pull up the date here to make sure. Just 4 weeks ago, when they got bombarded by the Red Raiders at Texas Tech, and now it's a situation where they're going to play again, and I understand that BYU, if they win this game, you got to put them in, which means is Notre Dame or Miami out? And then that argument there is, and of course this is for the Big 12 championship, the argument there is that, well, Notre Dame deserves to go because they're ranked in the top 12 and not Miami. And the people in Coral Gables are going to say, well, wait a minute, Miami beat Notre Dame week 1 of the season. So something's got to give, right? Well, I would think as Notre Dame being the brand that they are, and it's not to say Miami isn't, but Miami had those bad losses to SMU and Louisville, where the Fighting Irish lost to Miami, all right, but they also lost to Texas A&M. And A&M is in the top 12. So despite their schedule being a cupcake, because it's not as if after those first 2 games that they lost, and remember, they lost to Miami and Texas A&M back-to-back, their schedule's been a cupcake. I understand, all right, maybe USC and Pittsburgh toward the end of the year because they were ranked. But come on, Notre Dame played nobody this year. So I don't want to hear, and Miami's, for the same part, they played nobody too because that conference is terrible, the ACC. But because of those losses that they had, and both Miami and Notre Dame aren't playing this week, where their fate could be sealed whether or not BYU wins. Now, if Texas Tech wins, and we know Tech, as I pull up the standings here, Tech is going to be in no matter what, even if they do lose the game. So then it's a thing where, all right, is it Notre Dame or Miami? But then you could also throw in Alabama in the mix if they lose, because you're going to have a scenario there where if Texas Tech wins, they're fine. You don't have to worry about BYU. But that's where if BYU wins, you got to put them in, and that means Notre Dame, Miami, one of those 2 are out. But what if BYU and Alabama loses, where Alabama falls out, and therefore, what are you going to do? Now, Notre Dame is in, as you know. But BYU, that's going to be the fascinating thing. Whether them or Miami get in. And I think BYU right now is ranked 13th and then Miami 14th. As I pull those up real quick. Just to be 100% sure. As a matter of fact, 11th and 12th I might add. Because I'm right, the 11th and 12th goes to the conference champ, Big 12, and then the winner of that Tulane game. Oh no, of Troy and James Madison. I said Tulane. I said that yesterday on the live stream and I screwed that up. So right, those two spots are going to go to those winners. What do you do? BYU 11th and Miami 12th. And it's going to be fascinating. How I look at it here, if BYU wins, to me it's about head-to-head. And I understand that happened in August. And to my guy, John Irving, I love you. But I'd have to say Miami deserves to get that spot, not Notre Dame. But if you ask me, I think Notre Dame's going to get in. Because of the brand, because of their recent history. Obviously, they were in the championship game last year. And again, they're Notre Dame. So Miami's going to be on the outside looking in, and there's going to be everybody in South Florida are going to be up in arms. So the only thing I would suggest is that you have to root for Alabama. Well, first root for BYU to lose. You got to root for Texas Tech. And then hope Alabama loses. And then maybe Miami will get in through the back door. Other than that, I can't see it. Because remember, Alabama will have 3 losses on their ledger where Miami's 10-2. That's the only way Miami gets in. So if BYU wins, that's a bad sign. And obviously if Alabama wins, bad sign for Miami, that is. The only way they'll get in is if BYU and Alabama loses, in my eyes. Now, I'm not the committee, I don't know, but we'll have to wait and see on that. And that's what college football has boiled down to here in this last weekend before the Army-Navy game and then obviously the playoff begins the week after that. So your schedule for the weekend is as follows. High noon, BYU Texas Tech for the Big 12 championship. 4 o'clock for the SEC championship, Georgia, Alabama. And then the nightcap, Indiana, Ohio State. And you also got to remember Duke, Virginia. That's the other championship we've got to find out. Because Virginia, and that's the other thing Miami's going to be upset about too. Because of some stupid, weird tiebreaker rule, Miami, who should have been in that game against Virginia, you had Duke there. And we would think Virginia's going to win when it's all said and done. But can you imagine if Duke wins? You're going to put Duke there in the Final 12? Where Duke, if they win that game, their record's going to be 8-5. So that game kind of gets forgotten here. But also Miami, there's a faction that's going to look at that and say, oh, why is Duke there? Because, again, these weird tiebreaker rules. But that's another game you got to pay attention to because Duke could actually get into, which would be a disgrace. But that is your college football. And then the game tomorrow with Troy and James Madison, that's outside of the Power 5. That is for a spot in the tournament. So that's your college football. Now as I turn my attention, at least at the high tops, to go through the NBA, and you got a couple of very interesting storylines here leading into the weekend, and one that could shift the balance of power depending on where this person gets moved, but who knows if he gets moved at all? I'll explain. So a report has come out that Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Bucks superstar, will meet with the front office to discuss the future of Giannis, of where he may go or he could stay if the Bucks aren't going to make any moves here. And the Bucks right now, I think they won last night. Did they not? Let me just make sure as I want to be accurate here. The Bucks did win last night. They are currently 10-13, 10th in the Eastern Conference right now. And you have to think the Bucks aren't going to have a big year. Yeah, they may get in as a play-in or maybe somehow fall into the top 6. But the Bucks are not going to be serious contenders. And this was something that was discussed during training camp. And Giannis even made a mention. He wants to stay in Milwaukee, but who knows? And now that these discussions may start to percolate to where Giannis could be looking for a landing spot. Whether that be in New York with the Knicks, whether that be in San Antonio with the Spurs. Who knows what that's going to be. But last night he left the game with a calf injury, and it was a non-contact injury. And we know calves are tricky. As we've seen, calves could turn into Achilles tears, and we know Achilles tears, that's minimum a year. So what is going to happen here with the discussions? I'm sure they'll still be engaging between Antetokounmpo's camp and the Buck front office, but you're going to have to monitor this injury because could you imagine? He's hurt now. We don't know the prognosis, MRI, etc. I don't think it's an Achilles as of right this very moment, but those calf injuries are tricky. And imagine he gets healthy, trade is consummated, and then this sucker's either going to nag or, dare I even say, it gets worse to where you have a scenario where you're not going to have him for over a year. It's going to be a buyer beware situation. And I understand medical records, everything has to be cleared by doctors, probably on both ends, not even just on the Buck side, but whomever's going to obtain the two-time MVP. So it's going to be fascinating on many levels as to how this is going to play out. And mind you, the trade deadline is not until February 5th, so it's not as if they got to make a trade tomorrow. So this is in its early stages, but not only where he may go and end up, but will he go? Because we don't know the extent of this injury as of right this very moment. And as I pull up to see if there's anything late on this, all right, he's going to get an MRI as a right calf strain, but again, we don't know the extent of this sucker. So we're going to have to certainly monitor this and wait and see not only where he could end up or may end up, but does he get traded at all because who knows the extent of this injury? Is it a grade 2, grade 3? Is it mild? Who knows? So that is one that I will certainly keep an eye on and have my fingers on the pulse to see whether or not a blockbuster is going to be forthcoming in Milwaukee. When I say forthcoming, not in the days and weeks to come, but maybe once we get into the new year and certainly when the trade deadline arises there in that first week of February, whether or not Giannis is going to be a Buck or not. So that is story number one. The other big news story that came out in the last couple of days was the Clippers jettisoning Chris Paul. Now, I understand Chris Paul is going into his final year. He says he's going to retire after this year. We know about what he's done throughout the course of his career. In my eyes, not a top 5 point guard all time. Top 10, yes. Hall of Famer, without a doubt. But Chris Paul, as great of a career as he's had, a lot of that you could say, when you're playing 20 years, you're going to compile a lot of numbers, a lot of stats. And yes, again, that's not knocking him, the player, his career, not at all. But that's like me. I could do a podcast for 20 years and I could get my podcast in for awards if it does happen to go in that route. But you would think if I'm going to be in the game for 20, 25 years, maybe I'll get an award somewhere along the line as opposed to just doing it for 5, 10 years and getting 5, 6, or 7 awards during that time, as opposed to getting an award or two over a 25-year period. I digress. But for the Clippers, a team that is now 5-16, and I believe they lost last night, did they not? To the no, actually they won last night. They won in Atlanta. Who knows? Maybe of what was going on there attributed to their rather sluggish start. But in fairness to Paul, he was released, and a lot of what was said was because he was holding players and coaches accountable, which to me is a good thing. But to the Clippers, it was disruptive to the point where he and Tyronn Lue weren't even on speaking terms. And Chris Paul, 20 years, future Hall of Famer, and I understand Tyronn Lue has a ring on his finger from his days in Cleveland, 2016, and is a very good coach. But whatever that was discussed between player and coach and philosophies and just accountability, things of that nature, you know what? I got to side on Paul, because if he's a stickler for detail and discipline and all that, and looking at how the Clippers have gotten off to this start with the veteran roster that they have, and obviously this is not the start that Steve Ballmer and company wanted. Second year in that building, coming off of a mini playoff run last year. Remember, they lost in the first round to Denver. It's 7 games. Was it 7 or 6? No, I think it was 6 games because the Clippers had the home court. So they're just in the middle of the night where on his Instagram, Chris Paul's going to say, "See you guys, I'm going home." Now, I understand they're in the middle of a long road trip and they were going to send him home at some point. But did they have to announce it, I guess, after midnight, where they knocked on his hotel room door and they said, "Chris, here's an airplane ticket. You're going back to LA. You've been relieved of your duties as a member of the LA Clippers." I get it. It's a business. It's cold. It's hard. It's the reality. 100%. But could they have waited till the next day? Could they have done this and maybe in a bit more of a classier manner? Now, I don't know. Maybe it was done at 9 o'clock at night and Chris Paul put out the post after midnight. Who knows? But I get it. If you're 40 years old and he's averaged 2.9 points a game, and I understand it's in a limited part-time role, coming off the bench, etc. And I don't have the pom-poms for Chris Paul. I would think he's probably going to resurface elsewhere, maybe on a team that's going to win. What team is that right now? I got news for you. Why not the Knicks? Use him as a backup point guard. I know they got Tyler Kolek, but you know what? Put Chris Paul. Now, I don't know. Mike Brown, more of a player's coach. Could he wear out his welcome there if he were to be signed by the Knicks? Quite possibly. But that would be a start if you ask me in my eyes. And I'm sure the Knicks fan would be like, we don't need Chris Paul, blah, blah, blah. I just look at it as a guy that could spell Brunson for 12 to 14 minutes a game. Why not? And it will reinvigorate him. He'll be playing in the Garden. I'm sure that would be something. Granted that he's played his whole career in the Western Conference. Maybe that's a situation where he would look at it and say, you know what? It's New York. It's MSG. Why not? Let's get it. Just a thought. So let's see if Chris Paul lands on his feet elsewhere, or is it going to be a situation where that's it? He's just going to hang up his high tops and call it a career. I don't think we've seen the end of him just yet, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, that was a shock. Even James Harden, I was shocked. I got it on my phone. I couldn't believe it, but I got to go about my business, focus on what I got to focus on, etc. But yeah, just a big surprise, and how it was handled, at least from what we've read, not good there by Lawrence Frank, the VP of Basketball Ops, there for the Clippers. Besides that, there really isn't much else going on. I know on Monday I talked about the Thunder, 21-1, only the 4th team in the history of the league to do so or have that type of record. Let's see. Yeah, other than that, you got nothing else really that's going on. I know the Suns have played well. I got to give it up to them. They've been a surprise. I believe they got off to a slow start too, if I might add. But Suns are playing well as they are 13-9, 7th place. But listen, with the purging of Bradley Beal, how did that work out there in LA? As you're not going to see him for the remainder of the year. And with Devin Booker now has a groin strain, but they've played pretty well. So, and I only bring up Phoenix because that's a team that obviously Chris Paul was on a few years back. But with the Thunder and the way they played, what else? I mean, there really isn't anything else I could touch on here. Now, you have some interesting games here over the course of the weekend, which we'll look at. I know the Raptors are in 2nd place, which is mind-boggling. And I know they had a long losing streak snapped there the other day when they lost to the Hornets, and they lost to the Knicks there on Monday. But they had won, 9 in a row, I believe it was? 1, 2, 3. They had won 9 in a row and actually had won 13 of 14 before losing those 2 games to the Hornets and Knicks in back-to-back games. And then they beat Portland last night. So a big surprise there north of the border for the Raptors and how they played. But the schedule here for the forthcoming weekend, you got Golden State of Philadelphia tonight, but no Steph Curry as he's dealing with I believe, a thigh contusion, so he didn't even make the trip, so you're not going to see him, and they're going to play on the East Coast. They're going to play, I believe, Cleveland and Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I got that correct. Yes, Cleveland and Chicago here over the course of the next 4 days in Philadelphia tonight. And listen, that's nothing you could do. It's not as if you're going to see him sitting on the bench and he's just, I got knee soreness. So for those in those cities, they're going to miss Steph Curry there in their town this year. But you have Celtics in Washington, Utah at Brooklyn, as they're in New York the next couple of days because they play the Knicks, I believe, tomorrow night. Yes, they do. The Jazz, that is. Lakers at Toronto, good game there tonight. And Minnesota at New Orleans. How about Zion Williamson? Hurt again? Left adductor. He's out 3 weeks. And no, he's going to be minimum 3 weeks. Going to reevaluate him at that time. Oh, my goodness. That guy, he cannot stay healthy. I don't know what's happening. He needs to do yoga. He may be lifting too many weights, or I don't know. But those are your matchups there. Tomorrow night, your Amazon Prime games, 7 o'clock. Lakers at Boston. Celtics have played well here as of late. Jaylen Brown has been unconscious too, so hopefully that keeps up tomorrow as the Lakers will invade Beantown. Then you have Dallas at Oklahoma City's your 9:30 Prime Video game. In between, Miami and Orlando, Denver at Atlanta, San Antonio, Cleveland, Jazz and Knicks, as you know, Charlotte, Toronto, Indy, Chicago, Phoenix at Houston. There you go, good game there. Clippers at Memphis, Philly at Milwaukee. Saturday, you have Orlando. Orlando at the Knicks. No, that's Sunday. I was going to say, wait, how's it going to be an afternoon game for the Knicks? And that'd be 3 straight games for the Knicks, right? Because they play... No, they don't play tonight. Saturday, New Orleans at Brooklyn. So you're not going to see Zion there for those who are curious. Atlanta, Washington, Golden State, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Detroit, Sacramento at Miami, LA, Clippers, that is, at Minnesota, Houston, Dallas. And then on Sunday, you have Atlanta at New York at noon. Boston, Toronto, good game there. Denver, Charlotte, Portland, Memphis, Golden State, Chicago, Lakers in Philadelphia, and then OKC at Utah. And that'll round out your NBA for the weekend. Now, as far as the NHL, there isn't much that's happening there. Let me just double check something. Oh, one thing I want to say, 2 things in the NBA real quick that I did not want to forget. Danilo Gallinari retired 16 years. Remember, drafted by the Knicks, went to the Nuggets, bounced around on a million teams. Good player, good shooter, tall, lean. Tore his ACL when he signed with the Celtics, and they thought that he was going to be a big addition there. That was the year that they lost to the Heat. That 2022-2023 year. Gallinari was on that team, and then they brought in Kristaps Porzingis the following year, and of course won the championship. But had a long career, good shooter, good size, small forward, retired after 16 years, so congrats to him. All the best to him in his next chapter in life. And then some sad news, which happened about almost 2 weeks ago. Rodney Rogers, who was a very good NBA player. Rogers was a small power forward, could shoot the three, played on the Celtics there in those early 2000s teams, played on Phoenix, played on a few other teams. He had suffered that ATV accident, if you remember, where he was paralyzed from the neck down, died. Don't know what the cause of his death was, but 54 years of age. Oh, man. I mean, way too young. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Rogers family, NBA, etc. That's just a terrible tragedy there for him and what he had to go through after he suffered that accident and, of course, perishing there a couple of weeks ago. Now, as far as the NHL, the only things that you have going on there, right now your MVP of the league is Nathan McKinnon. And we talked about the Avalanche on Monday where they still have 1 loss in regulation. They have been just a behemoth in the sport. They have 44 points, the most in the league, and they're actually coming to my neck of the woods this weekend where they'll play the Islanders at UBS tonight, and then they'll play Saturday afternoon at the Garden, 12:30. So for those in the tri-state area that want to go see the former number 1 overall pick, when was that, 2016 I think it was? I think it was the year after McDavid. So McKinnon, who has been a monster this year, 22 goals, leads the league, has 46 points, I believe. And he'll be coming to town here to play the Islanders and Rangers. They played the Devils a couple weeks back, and they had a home and home, if you recall, where they played on a Sunday in New Jersey and then went to Colorado the Tuesday. So you'll see them at the Island against New York, and then at the Garden against the Rangers. And at New York, of course, the Islanders. And then they go to Philadelphia over the week. They go to Philadelphia Sunday, so they have an afternoon game at the Garden Saturday and then play in Philadelphia on Sunday. I believe a 1 o'clock start. We'll look at the schedule in a moment. So you have that. Alexander Ovechkin, the guy is just unstoppable. 2 goals last night in San Jose. Now at 9-11 for his career. So, and he came into this year, at 894, I believe. So he has 17 goals. The guy is just unstoppable. And you have to wonder, if he ends up, let's say he scores, what if he's about 50 or 55 goals away from 1,000? And remind you, he's in the last year of his contract. Will the Capitals re-sign him? He's 40 years of age, but the guy's not slowing down. If he's within 55, and let's say he ends at 4, if he's at 894, let's say he ends at 944. That's 50 goals. And he's going to be 56 away. And let's say he gets more than that. If he's between 50 and 55 goals, and that means he will score over 50 goals this year. Does he come back next year to try to go for 1,000? I mean, think about that. I mean, the guy's just been, he's indestructible. And then Tyler Seguin tore his ACL the other night at the Garden, which will be a loss. And he's been a long-time vet, as you know, going back to his days with the Bruins. But Seguin and the Stars, who have gotten off to that slow start but have righted the ship, but he's done for the year. Other than that, that's what you got there in the NHL. There really isn't anything else I could add. You know, we talked about it a lot on Monday's podcast. Lightning, who had that 7-game winning streak snapped by the Islanders a couple nights ago, but they're still 3 points ahead of Canadians in the Atlantic. Capitals are now in first place after their run. They've won 6 in a row, and they've actually won 9 of 10. Avalanche, like I mentioned, 19-1-6. Just an unbelievable start. Anaheim, who have cooled off a little bit, but they're still in first place in the Pacific, and that's going to be a logjam, considering that 6 points separate Anaheim and Edmonton, who are 6th in the division. So that's a race we'll see what will happen as we move it along. And as I mentioned, the Stars, they're 3 points behind the Avalanche right now in the Central. So that's what you have there in the NHL. And then lastly, as I take off the skates and put on the cleats to get in the batter's box to talk some baseball, the winter meetings begin Sunday in Orlando. And we know who the names are. Pete Alonso, Kyle Tucker, you have Cody Bellinger, and these are the starting players. I won't even go to the pitchers next. I'll get to the pitchers in a moment. But you also have Alex Bregman. You also have JT Realmuto. You have Bo Bichette. Eugenio Suarez. I said Kyle Tucker. We know about Alonso. Kyle Schwarber. It's another one. So those are the big position players or DHs. And then your pitchers, not a lot of big-time pitchers. Now, Edwin Diaz, the reliever, that is your big-time closer that's out there. Robert Suarez, Pete Fairbanks, who I would have liked for the Mets. I'm going to get to them in a second. Michael King. All right, could the Mets go after a guy like that? But again, a former Yankee pitcher. Do you see a theme here, people? You have Framber Valdez, who I would not touch. I won't go anywhere near. And I like him, but when he's on, and when he's not, he's not. Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly. You have some decent starting pitchers there that are on the market. Now, the question is that are we going to have an active few days here, not only leading into the weekend, but once we get to Orlando, how this is all going to unfold? Last year, you got activity, and you did see some player movement. How much player movement? That remains to be seen. I would think out of all the big-name players, I would think you're going to see some players get signed. I don't think you're going to get everyone signed, from Alonso, Bregman, Bellinger, Tucker. I don't think that's going to be the case, but you're going to see some people come off the board here. And not a lot of rumblings. I know Pete Alonso may be going to Boston with the Red Sox. That we'll have to wait and see. Maybe Kyle Tucker comes to the Bronx if the Bellinger thing falls through. Will the Mets be interested in Bellinger? I don't know. I haven't heard rumblings about that. Does anybody want an aging catcher in JT Realmuto? If I'm the Mets, I wouldn't do that. Keep Francisco Alvarez. Bo Bichette, who's going to get a big payday. Does he stay in Toronto? Does he go elsewhere? Eugenio Suarez, big home run bat. Glove, not so much. We shall see. Ranger Suarez is another guy, too. No relation. You got a lot of Suarez's out there. Robert Suarez, the closer from San Diego. Wouldn't be surprised if he goes up the turnpike to fit himself in a Dodger uniform. But you got Ranger, Eugenio, and Robert. No relation, any three of those guys. Where Edwin Diaz goes, that remains to be seen. And I guess I'll just segue into that. Because if you watch my podcast on Monday, you got an instant reaction to me reading the news that the Mets signed Devin Williams to a 3-year, $51 million deal. Very good deal from a fiscal standpoint, 100%. But it's the pitcher that they brought. Another import from the Bronx to Queens, which could be the same thing for Michael King, because I can see them being interested in him, a guy that you're not going to break the bank for, but you could get good bang for your buck. Maybe he's a guy that you could get, and this is just going off the top of my head, maybe 4 years, $100 million, and that may be a little bit too rich for the Mets blood. $25 million a year for Michael King. But we do know that Devin Williams is a part of the Met bullpen, maybe as an eighth inning guy. They still have thoughts of bringing back Edwin Diaz, but at what cost? Considering I think he wants another 5 for 100. And if I'm Steve Cohen, I wouldn't do that. I'll give you 5 for 75. So more annual average as far as per year, but you're only going to get 3 years. I would do that. Then you have Devin Williams, your eighth inning guy, and I believe it's been broached to him that you will be our closer if we don't sign Diaz, but if you're going to be the eighth inning guy, are you okay with that? And I believe he said that's fine. Which that's good, but imagine $17 million for an eighth inning guy? That's a lot. Only the Mets and certain other teams could do that. But did David Stearns not see the type of year he had last year? And I understand his connection from his days in Milwaukee and how productive he was being a Rookie of the Year in 2020. And although he wasn't there that year where Pete Alonso, he was probably in the building when Alonso hit the home run off of Williams in the wild card round. But, does that not give you the ick, Met fans? Knowing that you brought in Clay Holmes from the Yankees last year, and all right, he did well, give it up. You brought in Frankie Montas, did not work out, not even on the team anymore. And now you're going to bring in Devin Williams, and you could possibly bring in Michael King. Why not bring in Cody Bellinger while we're at it? I don't know the affinity of these Yankee ball players that the Mets have brought in over the years. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But not only that, did they not see how bad he was? And I get it, relievers from one year to the next. They could be lights out or they could just burn out. But, I don't care about the whiff rate. I don't care about the bloated ERA. None of those stupid metrics that everybody hangs their hats on. All I know is that this guy blew game after game after game. And even in this last performance, and I probably said this on Monday, so if I'm repeating myself, my apologies. Game 4. Toronto in the wild card round. And I understand it wasn't all his fault because of the error by Jazz Chisholm. But when he absolutely positively had to get an out there, and I believe it was second and third at the time because they also had a wild pitch, which made the runner on first go to second. But Nathan Lucas, I believe he hung one of those airbenders that he's known for, Devin Williams, and he punched it out into left field. A 2-1 game became a 4-1 game. And the Yankees go bye-bye into the offseason and into the abyss of not getting to and winning a World Series for the 16th consecutive year. So this is what the Met fans are going to have to potentially look for in 2026. So I guess you could kind of tell I did not like the signing. Listen, the money and the years, that's fine. And there's no opt-outs, none of that. But you can only hope that Devin Williams has learned from his year in the Bronx. And mind you, he's going into a bigger situation from this regard, and then I'll shut up and say goodbye. I understand the Yankees, it's World Series a bust. Maybe not with the front office anymore, because Hal Steinbrenner, it's all about pinching pennies and making sure that the generational wealth gets spread and will continue to grow once he passes and hands the torch down to somebody else. He's certainly not his dad when it comes to winning is only second to breathing. But when I look at how the front office of the Mets and this deal, and yeah, it can be boom or bust, I get it. But the thing that scares me, even though he's got that year experience in the Bronx and who knows, but he's going to go to a franchise that hasn't won in 4 decades. A fan base that has had it up to here with the close calls or near misses when it comes to either making the playoffs, as we saw their season die in Miami yet again, well, at least in that franchise, as we saw that back in 07-08, and opportunity after opportunity just slipping through their hands, them being the Mets, having the black cloud, etc., and you bring in a guy who not only had a bad year in the Bronx last year, but this is the one guy that maybe has to go through the, dare I even say, Armando Benitez milk bath to exercise whatever demons that he has from the Alonso home run. I mean, this is, you can't make it up. You just can't. But the guy at large is David Stearns. And he wants to bring in Devin Williams and guys that he knows, etc. That's why it's going to be fascinating to see how this is all going to unfold starting Sunday. And obviously there could be activity before then, but once the winter meetings kicks off, and let's see if there's going to be any early activities so that I can report there on Monday. You know I'll be all over that, and we'll discuss at that time. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode, just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff on Apple, Spotify. JAYREELZ.com is the website. The YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, as I post content there daily. I got a lot of stuff cooking there, so please, if you haven't subscribed, I implore you to do so. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you could do so at the aforementioned YouTube channel or on my social media accounts, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or JAYREELZ on Instagram. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood and the DNA since birth. Talking sports, as long as I sit in front of this microphone and camera, I promise you, I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South End, to the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.